So today I wanted to talk about Transformers 1, the new Transformers movie that was released in September 20th, 2024, and basically follows the origin story of the Transformers as we know them. We get to see Optimus Prime, Megatron, and basically get to see how the Decepticons and Autobots get formed. We get to see the planet Cybertron, and the interesting thing about this movie is there aren't that many humans. A lot of people have always complained that Transformers movies always show too many humans. They want to see a story based on the robots and the robots alone. They want to see a movie just about the Transformers because the way they used to be, in order to tell the Transformers story, you needed humans in them. And those were a lot of fun. I really did love the Michael Bay movies. The 2007 Transformers movie and Revenge of the Fallen and Dark of the Moon are all very memorable in their own way. And I think the original three of that trilogy are iconic. But it's interesting we now have a Transformers movie just about the Transformers. And it's pretty divided, and I wanted to talk about that today. The reviews for this movie have been pretty solid, pretty stellar. People are enjoying this movie, but the movie suffered a death at the box office. It made very little money, and it did get good reviews, so I want to talk about that today. So a major issue with Transformers 1 is the marketing. I think this movie suffered a death of 1,000 cuts. The marketing for this movie sold it as very kiddie at first, which would turn off older fans. And honestly, I think this movie was mostly meant for the older fans. Someone summed it up really great, saying this was basically a kids movie with a target audience of people in their 40s. I think a lot of people who are going to be seeing Transformers movies are people who have seen the Bayformers movie. You're not necessarily going to have really young kids who are really into Transformers because that's not the target audience. Kids want to see movies like The Wild Robot and Garfield and Despicable Me and Inside Out 2. Those are movies that made a lot of money, and they're based on properties that kids today like. I think Transformers is great and kids could still like them, but it's just not as popular as it once was. There's also franchise fatigue. The last Transformers film just came out last year. Previous films in the franchise had mixed reception outside of Bumblebee. Previous films in the franchise were also live action, which might make some audiences feel that going to this animated film is a step down or cheaping out. Even the acclaimed Spider-Verse films haven't done as good business-wise as the worst live-action Spider-Man film. And some people also felt that the character design reminded them of TV animation. Also, the faces are very human. That was something that actually turned me off. I understand that they're going for the design of the original TV show and the original action figures, but I remember seeing this design and thinking, this is just a little odd. It's a little uncanny valley. Transformers 1 just looked like a straight-to-streaming movie, and it's not as cute as the rest of the animated successes are, so I think people weren't really drawn to the visual style of this. Not to mention The Wild Robot opened 1 week after Transformers 1, and that not only had a cute story little kids could like about a mother trying to teach her little goose son how to fly, there was just more appeal in that movie. It was more for kids. I don't think parents are going to take their children to see Transformers 1 because it looks more like a movie for adults, and honestly, it is. Transformers is a franchise that people who are now adults probably will know more than kids. Kids are going to see Inside Out. They're going to see The Wild Robot, Garfield, and Despicable Me. That is more of a movie for kids. The story is more war-oriented, which might not appeal to certain animation fans. Certain demos might like a gentle story about the robot raising the orphan gosling, making friends with cute animals, a humorous story about a silly former villain creating a family and living with the very familiar and funny yellow creature mascots, which is Despicable Me 4. They also probably will like a story about a funny lazy cat who's from a well-known comic book series, or a universal, gentle, and funny family-friendly story about dealing with your inner emotions with varied characters to appeal to many folks. Transformers 1 doesn't really have that. And yes, it does have the different Transformers. You have Optimus Prime, Megatron, you have Bumblebee, who's kind of there for comic relief, you have Scarlett Johansson and Chris Hemsworth both doing voices, which might bring the familiarity of Avengers, which a lot of people do like, but it is not enough. And I think what I was saying before with just the design of the creatures, or the Transformers really here, it isn't really a lot that's going to draw in young kids. Transformers simply is just not as popular as it used to be, and now you have this divided and broken fan base. Some folks don't like animated versions, for example, so you may have lost some general audience or live action fans with this animated version. Its competitor films are very cute, funny, and or are major IP that appeal to many children or families, such as Inside Out and Despicable Me. There's also another recent reboot and a prequel that is too close to another reboot, which was only a year ago, which we got Rise of the Beasts. Basically, the brand is having an identity crisis. Paramount is struggling with how to save this franchise after the Bayformer films ran their course and soured fans by the end. The Last Knight was absolutely terrible, and ever since they've been trying to do these movies that just weren't as good. They hoped Bumblebee would save them, and even though it was the best reviewed film of the franchise, audiences didn't really show up to that movie. So then they pivoted back to Bayformers much longer later. I think it was like 6 years later with The Rise of the Beast, and despite having a good hook, that film was just meh. It was not good enough to separate itself from the past Bayformers films, and honestly, Rise of the Beast was just so bland, so boring. No one really liked that. I really personally did not like that movie at all. Now we have an animated film that sells itself as being one way, and is actually way better than it looks, but there's just too much variety, distrust, and disinterest, and ultimately, Transformers doesn't have the luxury that other franchises have. There's not enough room for experimentation. Not a lot of people are going to go out to this movie because Transformers just isn't as big as it once was. I think at the end of the day, this is a fun, very safe movie, but it isn't anything too amazing, and it doesn't have that same energy that the Michael Bay films had that brought lots of people in droves to see them, and those were live-action movies, but they had this big, epic appeal, kind of like The Avengers. Those movies started to basically take on where Transformers had left off, and you had really huge superhero movies, and before that, you had these Transformers movies, which were so fun. But this is kind of, in a way, like a step down when you look at it. Yeah, it's really great that we're getting to see Cybertron and the world of the Transformers. We don't need humans in this story. It is just telling a straight Transformers story. That's great. Sadly, at this point in time, it's not a movie that's going to draw a big audience. You can't really have this story that was once told on this huge live-action grand scale format with like almost 3-hour-long movies and then kind of reduce it down to a quick animated movie that is meant for kids. It just isn't going to draw in those same audiences. I saw this at a very late screening at like midnight on a Saturday in Times Square in the huge 4D auditorium. I was expecting it to be pretty packed. There were like 6 people there. This movie is not one that's going to appeal to people because it's an animated Transformers movie coming out just after a pretty bad Transformers live action movie came out last year, and no one really wants to see this movie. The design is not that appealing. It isn't an idea that many people outside of older audiences really are craving. It's kind of a niche audience at this point. And that's not even mentioning that the plot of Transformers 1 is pretty basic. I do like that we have Sentinel Prime again as the villain, but I don't think he is compelling enough. And I do like the chemistry between Optimus and Megatron, but it doesn't have that same chemistry that the Shia LaBeouf movies did. I completely understand wanting to make a movie without the humans, but honestly, I did kind of miss that crazy dynamic. I think only Michael Bay can bring that into the Transformers franchise. As they tried to do with Rise of the Beast and Bumblebee, there was a bit of fun to be had there, but it wasn't the same at all. It was more like a pale imitation. I do think it's a very hard formula to crack, but Michael Bay did it. You just need that chaos, the human energy, and I think that bonding with the robots. After all, Michael Bay had Steven Spielberg pitch him the movie as E.T., What If It's a Boy in His Car? And that ended up being an amazing box office success. Movie formulas often require a lot of tinkering to make them work, and Transformers 1 definitely needed that. I do think it is a totally fine movie, but it's very basic and very just simple. It doesn't have a lot going for it. I don't think a lot of people are going to rewatch it. It does give you that origin story to Transformers. It is really beautiful. It does have really great music, and I do think the story is totally fine. It just isn't enough. So guys, let me know what you think of Transformers 1. Hopefully we can get future Transformers movies on the levels that the Michael Bay movies were. We have great action, characters, and it's just so fun to watch. So guys, let me know what you think, and thanks for watching.